Today on the deep dive, we're jumping into a real historical detective story. It's all about one single book. Seems quite plain on the outside, actually. Our mission, like always, is to dig into these fascinating sources, find those key nuggets of knowledge, and give you, a shortcut to getting the important stuff.
Exactly.
And today's deep dive, it's into this, well, remarkable historical artifact. It really shows how much history can be hiding just beneath the surface. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. We're talking about a book, right? But not just any old book.
No, definitely not. It's the oldest Italian book they have in the scientific library of the Pushkin State Museum of Fine Arts in Moscow.
Wow, okay. The oldest Italian one there?
That's right. It's Marcus Vitruvius Pollio's 10 books on architecture, printed way back in Venice, 1511. And what's so interesting, as you said, is that on the outside, it looks, well, pretty ordinary. Dark brown calf leather binding, nothing shouting, "Look at me," no obvious owner marks.
Right, unassuming.
But inside, that's where the story is. It's just packed with clues.
A treasure trove, you called it. So it's got ink notes, marginalia stuff written in the margins, and what, drawings too?
Yeah, about 24 drawings scattered across, 96 of its 110 sheets.
96 sheets. Someone really lived in this book.
They absolutely did. And these aren't, just idle scribbles. They're quite extensive, sometimes dense, sometimes looking like they were jotted down really quickly. You even see ink stains, maybe even fingerprints.
Fingerprints, wow.
Which really suggested to the researchers, the Moscow Vitruvius project team, that this wasn't just casual reading. This pointed towards someone with a deep, likely professional interest. So the team set out on this amazing journey to figure it all out, decipher the notes, date them, and the big one, to attribute them. Who wrote all this?
Okay, so this book, this 1511 Vitruvius, it's in the Pushkin Museum now, got there in 1932. But getting to Moscow wasn't exactly straightforward, was it?
Oh, not at all. A winding path is putting it mildly.
Yeah.
So 1931 to 32 was briefly at the State Academy of Art Studies. Before that, between roughly 1918 and 1921, we know where it was. It was housed in the public reading room. This was at the Proletarian Museum, named after Lenin, out in Moscow's Lagusha-Lefortovo district.
A proletarian museum?
Yeah, they even found a stamp from that time, deciphered it. It was one of, I think, 8 of these proletarian museums, often built up from book collections that had been nationalized.
Interesting chapter.
Yeah.
But then there's this big gap, right, where the trail goes cold for a while.
A very long gap, yes. And then things get really fascinating. So we suddenly jump centuries and countries.
Okay, intrigued.
So between 1809 and 1918, its location is basically unknown. And how it even ended up in Russia, still a question mark. But the next definite point we have pins it down in the British Isles.
The UK.
Yes. From 1763 right up until he died in 1809, it belonged to a man named Robert Melville.
Robert Melville, and he was.
Quite a figure. A Scottish general, military engineer, an inventor, an antiquarian, even a botanist. He actually founded the St. Vincent Botanical Garden over in the Caribbean.
Goodness. So how did the researchers figure out it was his book?
Well, the big clue was his autographs. Found it right on a paste down inside the cover, dated 1763.
Ah, clear evidence.
Pretty clear. But they wanted to be sure, so the team reached out to the National Gallery of Scotland, they have his portrait, and they also tracked down other books known to be his in the Edinburgh University Library.
Did the handwriting match?
His autograph matched, yes. And they even found an ex libris, a book plate with his family crest in those other books. Matched up perfectly. But here's the crucial part. Those colleagues in Scotland, looking at the notes inside the Vitruvius itself, they immediately noticed that handwriting was much, much older. Looked like 16th century.
16th century. So not Melville's notes.
Definitely not Melville's. It was written in this elegant style, humanistic cursive script, very typical of the Renaissance. This pointed straight towards a much earlier owner, someone from that period.
So the plot thickens again. Now the hunt is really on for this 16th century intellectual. But where do you even start? You just have these notes, mostly in Latin, presumably.
Mostly Latin, yes. But the first big break came when they started finding little bits of Italian mixed in.
Italian? Like what?
Things like quick notes about bricks, distinguishing between ones thrown in the sun-dried, basically, versus those thrown in the furnace, meaning kiln-fired. Little practical details like that in Italian. That immediately told them, okay, our mystery reader is from Italy, the Apennine Peninsula.
Okay, narrows it down geographically. But what about the person? The notes themselves must have offered more clues.
Oh, absolutely. The citations were incredibly revealing. By carefully analyzing everything this person referred to, the team could basically reconstruct their reading list, their intellectual world.
Like mapping their mind through their library.
Exactly. It was quite a library, too. The earliest author cited was Theophrastus, the Greek philosopher from the 4th century BCE. And the latest, a book called Adversaria by a French philologist, Adrien Tourneb, printed in Paris in 1565. So that gives us a time frame.
So active reading happening around or after 1565?
Precisely. And the most frequently cited author, Pliny the Elder. Lots of references to him. Plus texts on agriculture, Columella, Palladius, Isidore of Seville.
A broad range of interests.
Very broad. But the really crucial citations, the ones that helped nail the attribution, were the references to 15th and 16th century humanist thinkers. People like Leon Battista Alberti, the architectural theorist Guillaume Philander, and especially the Venetian Ermolao Barbaro. Our reader even noted Barbaro's corrections to Pliny.
Okay, so now you have a profile emerging. Educated, reads ancient languages, knows humanist thinkers, has this specific library, interested in architecture theory, and from northern Italy. How did they finally connect that profile to a specific name? What was the clincher?
The absolute pivotal moment, the real breakthrough, came with one specific comment. It was about gravel, of all things.
Gravel?
Yes, an unnamed comment about gravel on leaf 70 of the Moscow book.
Oh.
And it perfectly matched a known Latin commentary on Vitruvius, a commentary written by a very prominent Venetian humanist named Daniele Barbaro, published in 1567.
Wow. One comment about gravel cracked the case.
It was the key piece that fit perfectly. Now, they had a strong hypothesis, Daniele Barbaro. So the next step was confirmation. The team got hold of digitized samples of Daniele Barbaro's actual handwriting from the Marciana National Library in Venice.
And compared it to the notes in the Moscow Vitruviy.
Exactly. They compared the ductus, that's the sort of individual flow and movement of the pen strokes.
And
it was identical, a perfect match. They could also see how Barbaro's known manuscripts, his working drafts for his own translation and commentary on Vitruvius, were laid out just like the Moscow book. Text in the middle, his comments crammed into the margins.
The same working step.
The very same. Even tiny details matched up the way he formed certain letters, abbreviations he used, like for the number 2, or this peculiar little mark he used for carta, meaning leaf or page.
Incredible detail.
But the absolute, undeniable proof, the smoking gun, if you will, was another note. Also on leaf 70, this time in Italian.
What did it say?
It read something like, read the discussion in the 4th book in my translation on leaf 9, under the sign vide. Vide meaning see.
In my translation.
Exactly. It was a direct self-reference. Proof positive that the person writing these notes was actively working on their own translation of Vitruvius.
Amazing.
And then, the final check. They went to Barbaro's second manuscript, the one held in Venice. They turned to the back of leaf 9 of the 4th book. And there it was, the little vide sign. And the discussion right there, it was about plaster, and it lined up perfectly with the context of the note in the Moscow book.
Case closed. Unbelievable detective work.
It really was. A fantastic piece of scholarly investigation by the Moscow Vitruvius' team.
So we've got him, Daniele Barbaro. This clearly wasn't just some casual reader. Tell us about him. Who was this guy?
Daniele Barbaro was a huge figure in Renaissance Venice. A major scholar, a humanist. Born into a noble family in 1514, he got the best education possible at the time, studied philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, optics, all at the University of Padua.
Padua, that's a big name.
Oh yeah, one of Europe's oldest universities, very famous for its Aristotelian studies back then. So he gets his doctorate in 1540, and then his career just takes off in all sorts of directions.
Like what?
Well, he published poetry, sonnets, and sermons. He also worked on the writings of his ancestor, Ermolao Barbaro, another famous humanist, publishing his unfinished work. And he was involved in public life, too. Served the Venetian Republic. He was even an ambassador to the British Isles for a couple of years, 1548 to 1550.
Ambassador to Britain. So he knew England and Scotland long before Melville owned the book.
He certainly did. Later on, he was appointed Patriarch of Aquileia. Apparently, that post didn't require, constant day-to-day work, which gave him the freedom, the time to really dive deep into his scientific and scholarly studies.
So that explains how he had time for all this intense work on Vitruvius, and maybe why some notes looked rushed, fitting it around diplomacy and church duties?
Quite possibly, yes. His main scholarly focus really became Vitruvius. He published his first Italian edition, with his commentary in Venice in 1556, a really important edition. It had 131 woodcut illustrations, and many of those were actually designed by the architect Andrea Palladio.
The Andrea Palladio.
The very same. And this 1556 edition was seen as a landmark, the first truly Italian translation. Barbaro worked incredibly hard to find just the right Italian words for Vitruvius's technical Latin terms. Really helped establish Italian for that kind of architectural discourse.
So he wasn't just translating, he was shaping the language of architecture in Italian.
Precisely. Then he brought out second editions in 1567, one in Italian, one in Latin, again with Palladio's illustrations. And interestingly, those later illustrations often used architectural cross-sections rather than the more common perspective views at the time. Quite innovative.
And this all came out of his reading of this specific book we're talking about.
A lot of it, yes. His notes in the Moskovskiy Vitruvius were clearly part of his working process for these publications. He even published his own book, Practice of Perspective, in 1568, which basically grew out of the work he was doing for the Vitruvius commentaries.
And you mentioned his library earlier. It was significant.
Oh, enormous. Known as one of the truly great private libraries in 16th century Venice. Hugely valuable. And because his citations in the Moskovskiy Vitruvius are so detailed, the researchers could actually identify about 25 specific books he owned and used.
You can reconstruct his bookshelf almost.
Pretty much. Everything from Alberti on architecture to math books by Jean Borel. They could even tell when he was using different editions of the same work. It really gives you the sense he had this Vitruvius copy with him constantly, maybe taking it between Venice and his country villa, always working on it.
Which brings us back to Palladio. This wasn't just Barbaro alone in his study, was it? This collaboration sounds crucial.
Absolutely crucial. Their collaboration started around the mid-1550s, and it was incredibly productive for both of them. You see, Barbaro, for all his brilliance, wasn't a practicing architect. Palladio helped him understand the really tricky practical passages in Vitruvius.
An architect's eye helping the scholar.
Exactly. And the most famous, most tangible result of this partnership is undoubtedly the Villa Barbaro.
The Villa Barbaro. I've heard of that.
It's magnificent. In Mazer, near Treviso. Palladio designed it for Daniele and his younger brother, Marc Antonio. And the inside. Frescoed by another giant, Paolo Veronese. It's a masterpiece embodying that whole Renaissance ideal of merging art, architecture, and humanist thought.
Wow. A building born from this intellectual partnership.
In many ways, yes. Tragically, Daniele Barbaro died quite suddenly in 1570.
Oh, relatively young then.
Yes, only in his mid-50s. His amazing library then passed to his brother, Marc Antonio, and eventually to Marc Antonio's sons. But that family line eventually died out. And after their deaths, it seems the library was broken up, likely sold off piece by piece.
And that's when our Vitruvius copy started its travels.
That's the strong likelihood. The evidence points towards it heading towards the British Isles sometime around the 1630s or 1640s.
How can they date that part of the journey?
Paper evidence, actually. There's a flyleaf inside with a specific watermark, a jug shape that's characteristic of paper made in northern France and England during that period. And the book was also rebound around that time. They found 2 pages from a much older manuscript, a 13th century Latin parchment, used to reinforce the new binding.
Fascinating. Little clues in the paper and binding itself. Okay, so let's quickly recap this incredible journey just to get it straight.
Let's try.
Printed Venice, 1511. Passes through at least one unknown owner.
Right.
Before landing with Daniele Barbaro in Venice, who uses it intensely from maybe the 1540s until his death in 1570.
Correct. Stays with his family for a while after that.
Then likely sold off, makes its way somehow to the British Isles, probably mid-17th century.
Seems likely, based on the rebinding in paper.
Then another gap.
Long on.
Until Scottish General Robert Melville buys it in 1763. Stays in his collection until 1809.
Got it.
Another missing link. How it gets to Russia, we don't know.
Still a mystery.
But it pops up again in Moscow in 1918 at that Proletarian Museum.
Yep.
Then a brief stop at the State Academy of Art Studies.
1931 to 32.
And finally lands at the Pushkin Museum in 1932, where you can presumably see it today.
Well, where it's housed today, access is obviously quite restricted because it's so unique and valuable.
Understandable. So after all this amazing work by the Moskovskiy Vitruvius project, what happens next? Is the investigation over?
In terms of identifying Barbaro and tracing the book's main story, yes, that part is largely complete. But the work continues. The team is putting together a major publication, a 2-volume monograph.
2 volumes. What will they cover?
Volume 1 will be a high-quality facsimile reproduction of the book itself. Every page, every note, every drawing. This is huge because it means scholars, students, anyone interested anywhere in the world can finally study it in detail, even without physical access.
Making it accessible, that's fantastic.
Absolutely. And the second volume, that will contain all the research findings, all the deciphered notes, translations, detailed commentaries, plus studies on the drawings, the ink chemistry, the paper analysis, the leather binding, everything.
The complete story and the evidence.
Exactly. So while you could say our deep dive into this book's main mystery is wrapping up, it feels more like, well, like a semicolon rather than a full stop.
Oh.
Because the methodology they developed, the way they pieced together the evidence, that provides a blueprint, a basis for other researchers looking at similar items. In fact, the team has already compiled a list. There are over 160 other known copies of that same 1511 Vitruvius edition sitting in libraries across the globe.
160 others.
Yes. And some of those also have annotations in them. Each one could potentially hold its own hidden story, waiting for its own detective work.
Wow, so this is just one chapter potentially opening up many others.
It certainly feels that way. It shows just how much might be waiting to be discovered in the margins.
What an absolutely incredible journey for a single volume. From Venice's printing presses through the brilliant mind of Daniel Barbaro, somehow across Europe to Scotland, then eventually to Moscow. It really drives home how much history can be just sitting there, hidden in plain sight, until someone does the painstaking work to uncover it.
It really does. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? If one book, seemingly ordinary at first glance, can contain such a detailed, layered history of thought, of travel, of ownership, just how many other invaluable insights are out there, hidden away in library stacks, tucked into the margins of old texts, just waiting for their own deep dive.
It really makes you think, what other stories are just waiting in the pages? What hidden connections, what lost knowledge might you stumble upon, maybe even in a book you own? Makes you want to look a little closer, doesn't it?